Hello everyone, and welcome to Restorative Health Solutions. If you understand what's making you sick, then you can start to understand how to get better. More information is power.
Hi, I'm Dr. Paul, and today is part 2 in the mold video series where we talk about how to detect if you're being exposed to mold and mycotoxins, how to test for mycotoxins in the body, and why some people are just more sensitive to mold and mycotoxins than others. In part 1 of the mold video series, we discussed mold, mycotoxins, sources of exposure, and common symptoms related to mold exposure and mold toxicity. If you haven't seen part 1, please go back and watch that video as well. Since we talked about the most common areas of mold exposure in part 1, the next question should be, how do I detect if I'm being exposed to mold and mycotoxins? And if so, where is this mold exposure coming from? The best way is to find a really good inspector that has a lot of experience in mold and uses the most up-to-date techniques, technology, testing, and approaches to mold inspection. I cannot emphasize this part enough. Speaking from both a client and customer perspective, having mold in our home and needing remediation, and also as a doctor and practitioner that sees several patients with mold exposure and mold toxicity. Some inspectors will come in and they might do an air test on each level of the home with a visual inspection and rely on that to see if you're being exposed to mold and mycotoxins. Whereas a really experienced mold inspector will come in and likely do air tests in several different areas of the home. They'll do a really detailed visual inspection on the inside and outside of the home, in the foundation, in the grade of the home, and they'll do things like dust sample collections or swabs or tape samples or use infrared imaging or use particle counters or use things like instascopes. A lot of people are still really hesitant to have an experienced mold inspector come in their home because they're afraid of what they might find or how much it'll cost. So one of the most common questions I get is there any other test that I can do on my home to see if I have a mold issue? While I don't believe that these options are as good as hiring a mold inspector to come into your home, there are some very common at-home tests that you can do. Air plates or mold gravity plates. These are essentially petri dishes that you set up in different areas of your home. You leave them open for about an hour, then you close the lid, seal them up tight, and allow 5 to 7 days for the mold spores to grow in the dish. You can visually inspect them yourself to see if you have an issue, but you would need to send them to the lab to know what type of mold is growing in the dish. Next is an ERMI test, an Environmental Relative Moldiness Index. This is a dust sample that you collect with a Swiffer cloth or a vacuum sample that analyzes DNA traces of mold and gives you a score on the significance of the mold that was collected. And lastly is an EMA test, Environmental Mold and Mycotoxin Assessment. This is also a dust collection that looks for the presence of molds and mycotoxins, which are the toxins released by the mold spore. You can also send in small sections of a furnace filter or piece of suspicious drywall as well. A swab is also available in this test to swab any suspicious areas. While these tests are less expensive options, you would still likely be contacting an experienced mold inspector if these test results were positive to see where the source of exposure is. They would then work with a remediation company to remove and clean up any problematic areas. Retesting is always suggested after remediation to ensure that the problem was taken care of. If you were exposed to mold and mycotoxins, then the next question is, do you have abnormally high amounts of mycotoxins in the body? So what's the best way to test? There are definitely different opinions on the best way to test for mycotoxins in the body, and here's the list. A mycotoxins urine test. The way this test works is we breathe in mycotoxins, or we get mycotoxins that come in from the skin or through the diet, and these mycotoxins work their way into the bloodstream, and our kidneys filter toxins from the blood and push them into the urine, including mycotoxins. The second option is a blood test that measures antibodies to the mold spores using IgG, IgA, and IgE antibodies. And the third option is a blood test that measures antibodies to the mycotoxins using IgG and IgE antibodies. In my experience, most clinicians use the mycotoxins urine panel, but there are arguments that say the blood test is more accurate and useful. And the last question that we're going to address in today's video is why some people are way more sensitive to mold and mycotoxins when compared to others. This answer is complex, and multiple factors can contribute to why one's more sensitive to mold. Genetics. Some people genetically can't optimally detoxify or remove toxins from the body, such as mycotoxins. The next one is nutritional deficiencies in key nutrients that help the body detoxify, like glutathione, alpha-lipoic acid, vitamin C, and many more. Next is liver congestion and sluggish bile. The liver makes bile and packages the toxins into the bile. The biles then push into the small intestine so these toxins can be removed from the body. The last one I call the stack effect. This is where we have poor diet, lack of exercise, stress, nutritional deficiencies, genetic predispositions, lack of hydration, and other lifestyle factors that can be lingering beneath the surface, and mold exposure can be the straw that breaks the camel's back. Another way to look at it is, if you have a bucket, each trigger, like food sensitivities, lack of exercise, stress, etc., adds water to the bucket. Once the bucket starts to overflow, we have issues. This is how the liver tries to handle toxins. So if you have mycotoxins in the body but are no longer exposed to mold and mycotoxins, what do you do next? In part 3 of the mold video series, we're going to talk about the steps in a mold protocol. How do you get the mycotoxins out of the body? How long does it take? And how do you give yourself the best chance of this not happening again? And until next time, I'm Dr. Paul.